So this video shows some key transformations that we are seeing more and more regularly, more typically with the introduction of the vibration tools to ABR, and this is very exciting to see the great progress of the previously very sort of stubborn and tricky scoliosis cases. Like for example, here we are working with a case where the girl is at her already well into her teens, so which means that on the one hand she continues her growth and the hormonal change, which creates a lot of kind of volatility there. On the other hand, the skeletal system is already quite well formed, right? So it's not a young child with a kind of assumption of the easy self-correction. So that's why this is very informative. So let's have a look at some key transformations that are essential. So first point that we can see is of course their profile of the back itself. But before we look at the spine, we should look at the key aspect, right? So we should look at the key aspect, namely at the fold. So the fold itself that emerges via the collapse of the ribs, so which is the tilt and that comes from the top, but most importantly, the one that emerges as the tilt of the pelvis into the abdominal space. And that's the one which creates the most problems because this is where the weight of the body, kind of the full weight of the torso goes into the ground, and then counter reaction, which then forces the pelvis into the conflict with the spine, into the conflict with the ribs, then the kind of the lock of the lumbar muscles and so on. So these are the key troubles. So now what we are seeing that there is a big progress in that domain. So that overall the tilt of the pelvis has much reduced. So that's the key thing. So on the one hand, we can see it via the better grip at the ground. On the other hand, of course, it's a change of this wedge. So the wedge, which was very folded, now this wedge is increasing. That's very clear. Also, what else do you see? You see the change of the overall fold. So where the skin grip to the ribs and the skin grip, overall is improving, thus enabling the improved abdominal support. The third thing that we are looking at here is that, in simple terms, the child is getting taller. So the support from the top, right? So you see, if you are supporting the child from the top, you're kind of exhibiting a certain stretch, a certain like traction to the spine. And when it's all fused, both at the spine and at the level of the fusion, like particular shortening at the lumbar and the waistline area, so then you have the trouble with everything, right? So you see, then you can't stretch the body. So this stretchability is a very big thing in itself because it shows that the elements which are considered to be fused, they could be unfused thanks to these innovative tools. And then once we see this, of course, there's a number of other important components. So we always talk about the things developing from the top. So, and that's what you see here. The support by the shoulders is a lot more comfortable. So the shoulders, they don't slide upwards. So therefore, that's the level of integration that then descends over the entire torso as a unit. Whilst here, you can see that the shoulder girdle is more locked as the support system for the head, and that's why it exhibits the fusion. So using the shoulders for support is much more difficult, so they are shifted forwards, and thus you generate a lot of discomforts there. And then once we see all that, now we can look closer at the change of the angles and the positions within the torso itself. So the first key point that we observe is the proverbial left, center, and right division, meaning the ribs, and the spine. So that's the key point, seeing the three-part division as opposed to the single fusion. And actually, if I'm drawing the single fusion over the entire spine, I'm giving it too much credit, because usually within that fusion there is also the particular bulge which takes all the loads. So in this system, the spine itself doesn't take any loads, so it just fuses to service the merge of all the elements into one block, right? And here we can see that the spine is diffusing. Now, once I remove the arrows and so on, what else do you see? You see that the ribs on the bulging side are clearly changing as well. So they are respectively showing the change of the spacing between the individual ribs and showing the activation of the intercostal muscles and ligaments which are linking those ribs, as opposed to the ones being fused in a video in the picture before. So all this taken together shows us how the collection of those transformations, the formation of the extra abdominal wedge, the linking of the lower ribs on the depressed side, the reduction of the collapse of the iliacs and the pelvis into the abdomen on the collapsed side, the unlocking in the ribs on the bulging side, the three-part division within the spine and enablement of the spine for the extra kind of stretchability. Then we see the better grip on the ground, we see the better counterbalancing controls at the waistline, and of course we see from the top the integration of the shoulder girdle that comes in two ways. On the one hand, there is an extra freedom of the neck, respectively the arms are allowed to go down and start working as the shoulder girdle, so the girdles coordinate better and provide the total torso support and significant improvement of comfort. So these are the things we really see very, very much today, and the huge part of it, the acceleration and the reliability of this process, is linked to the vibra tools, because the vibra guns, they are really allowing us to catch the response between the individual ribs and the intercostals. They also allow us to catch the response of the entire sort of field and layer of the ribs, even when they are collapsed or even when they are very fused. It also allows us to catch the response of the skin and mechanical fat factors, which is the primary integrator and the primary map from which the control starts. And then, of course, the additional benefits which we already discussed and pointed out, the stability of the shoulder blades, because the shoulder blades as such, so as the bones, they are not penetrable for any other action, so we can't go through them. With the vibra tools we can. And of course, speaking of the vibra ball, so you see that is allowing us to get the specific and deep response from within the spine and activate the deep spinal ligaments. And in the same fashion, from this deep application, it allows us to activate the pelvis and get the response of the deep pelvic ligaments, and thus translate into those connections. And of course, we then get the activation of the hip joint. So all the elements, including the joints, the hip and shoulder joints, they are being connected, and then, as the very important part of this enabling comes the improved stability of the neck itself, which speeds up with the vibra tools, the separations between the shoulder girdle and the neck, so which then enables the recruitment of the shoulder blades in particular as the stabilizing factors, which are then contributing towards the entire dorsal development. So that's the illustration of the key progresses, which I hope makes it clear how the new tools are helping us in even those very challenging, very stubborn, very severe cases of scoliosis and their unlock. So, and therefore we are inviting you all for that new perspective, and we are really happy to share with you the new tools, the new results which have been talking over the last year, and now you can see that the results are accumulating and really showing themselves in their very visible transformations.